Progressive rock. Prog. It's all about being complex, cerebral, intellectual. It's like anti-pop music. And prog heads will often talk trash on basic, brainless, boorish pop music. Superiority complexes aside, prog music is pretty cool though. In the 70s, it was full of multi-movement songs that took up entire sides of vinyl, musicianship so high caliber your average player could only hope to ever replicate the mechanics, time signatures so odd you had to be a mathematician to follow and understand, and lyrics pulling from all sorts of philosophies and hypothetical fantasy and or doomsday scenarios. It was a wild scene, so it's actually kind of a surprise that when the 80s came around with all its flash and neon and technology, a lot of these prog rockers caught the bug, started counting to 4, writing hooks and singing about LOVE and stuff. They all did it in their own way, so let's get into it. I'll link the vids in the description if you want to hear them in full. Here we go, let's check out how these 70s prog giants fared in the new wave 80s. Let's look at King Crimson first. Maybe the most surprising to qualify for this video look, but with the grooves and quirky sonics emanating from 1981's Discipline album, they absolutely qualify. With newcomer vocalist and guitarist Adrian Belew at the helm following a 7-year hiatus, bandleader and guitarist Robert Fripp and his new lineup completed by bassist Tony Levin and original Yes drummer Bill Bruford brought a redefined King Crimson sound to the era. While not overtly bubblegum new wave, they find themselves at least adjacent to the oddball new wave arena, calling to mind bands like The Talking Heads or XTC. This isn't surprising when you consider Adrian had just played lead guitars on the Heads' massive 1980 album Remain in Light, and his vocal stylings even sound a bit like a less caricatured and more utilitarian David Byrne. Apparently the Heads' rhythm section even considered a coup to oust Byrne and give the lead singer role to Belew, but it never came to fruition. This track, Thela Ginjeet, an anagram for Heat in the Jungle, could move the floor of any dance club of the era, and that's more than mildly amusing to consider a King Crimson jam capable of such a thing. The grooves take inspiration from Nigerian musician Fela Kuti, who the Heads also adored. The other big flavor to the 80s Crimson output, this lineup made 3 albums, Discipline, Beat, and 3 of a Perfect Pair, is a flavor of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Terry Riley. A lot of the songs work off of very short and tight musical loops, like the intro to 1983's Neal and Jack and Me from the album Beat, as in like Beat Poets, get it? This is also not surprising when you consider that Fripp and Belew met at a Steve Reich concert. But these tight compositions often give way to saccharine choruses and strange but captivating hooks. This new lineup was actually not originally going to be called King Crimson, but bore the band name Discipline, until they ultimately decided to brand it Crimson and continue the legacy. While you won't find those vaulted ultra hooks of jams like the Talking Heads' Once in a Lifetime, I might suggest that overall, 80s Crimson combines quirk and hooks in a less overt, more savory and sophisticated way than a lot of their contemporaries enjoying greater successes. How prog of them. 80s Yes starts out super crazy. Singer John Anderson and keyboardist Rick Wakeman leave to be replaced by the Buggles. Yes, the video killed the radio star Buggles. Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes join Yes on vocals and keys, and they make the 1980 album Drama. It's a good album, though it's actually still very prog because the Buggles can shred. And after the tour, the lineup dissolves. However, Trevor Horn sticks around to lend his pop master producer chops and produce 1983's 90125 album with singer John Anderson back at the helm. And this is where they really catch their 80s stride with the immaculately crafted and massive hit Owner of a Lonely Heart. This is another example where the band was actually working under a new name. They were going to call this band Cinema, but I guess once John was back on vocals, they couldn't resist carrying the Yes torch along. This album also sees guitarist Steve Howe replaced by Trevor Rabin and original keyboardist Tony Kaye back in the fold, along with bassist Chris Squire and drummer Alan White, but I could spend this whole video just talking about prog rock lineup changes. In another move, artist Roger Dean, known for his trippy, beautiful paintings of dreamy scenescapes, which they pretty much always used, does not do the cover artwork. Instead, an image created on an Apple IIe computer by a designer named Gary Mowat was used to signal the change and complement the new modern sonic techniques in play. The 80s Yes sound is more mainstream than Crimson and hangs in orbit with suave, cosmopolitan, new wavy adult pop like The Police or The Cars were making. Though there's still undeniable moments where their prog roots show through, be it odd time passages, tricky arrangements, or sonic head fakes into quick technical breakdowns. They served up another platter in '87 with the follow-up album Big Generator, which furthered similar explorations in technologically savvy, popish sounds, but supposedly consciously did not deliver another mega jam like Owner of a Lonely Heart. How prog of them. That said, the single Love Will Find a Way from Big Generator is still pretty sweet. Now, I think in the case of Crimson and Yes, generally speaking, their 70s prog era is considered their golden era or whatever, and the 80s provide some interesting mode switches with some positive results. But when it comes to Genesis, their 80s output kind of usurps their prog origins and becomes the defining era. Even by 1980, with the single Misunderstanding off the album Duke, they were delivering a breezy, poppy groove that basically stole Sly Stone's Hot Fun in the Summertime and went Beach Boys atop it. It should be contemptible, but it's infectious, damn it. They'd already pared down from a proggy 70s five-piece with the departures of singer Peter Gabriel and guitarist Steve Hackett. This resulted in a trio of multi-instrumentalists Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, with drummer Phil Collins taking over the lead vocal role from behind the kit. The album Duke, plus the next two albums, 81's Abacab and 83's self-titled Genesis, all combine poppy, quirky, sometimes proggy sounds well worth a listen, but 1986's Invisible Touch really tipped the scales, and also pulls in more of the elements I would specifically tie to new wave, like Phil using a Simmons electronic drum kit, and Mike using more 80s effects on the guitars. But ultimately, like the other bands, this isn't new wave music, just music both conscious of and in the new wave era. Invisible Touch's hook goes so hard, and Phil's voice cracks with an emotional pop immediacy that I both buy, and despite its cheesiness, or maybe even because of it, I just want to go back for it. I'm trying hard not to break into the Patrick Bateman spiel from Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho here. The band were legitimately on fire with Invisible Touch and had 5 singles that all hit top 5 in the Billboard Hot 100, a record only otherwise set at the time by Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, and Madonna. That is insane for then these guys to also do. I do believe that while I was comparing Crimson to the Talking Heads or Yes to the Police, Genesis became their own thing. They actually set the parameters fully. Maybe that's just due to the distinctive nature of Phil's voice, but to me they just sound like Genesis. They are the archetype. The last thing I want to say before this becomes a Genesis video is they really did a good job of poking fun at themselves and making goofy yet cool videos. Earlier we saw Phil cruising around in a convertible looking like the ultimate dad rock Dorcas Amorcus. In this video for Land of Confusion, we have just straight up demented looking, overly caricatured puppets representing the band. That's both funny and really rad artistically. It grounds them and is disarming as you realize that you actually maybe like this stuff. That, hey, thank God these guys maybe aren't the most pretentious jerk-ass dudes in the world. How not prog of them. my god, Rush made 7 albums in the 80s. How am I also now not gonna turn this into a Rush video, or a 2-hour-long video for that matter? Prog, and its nature to just expand and indulge, am I right? Okay, it's alright, I know what we gotta do. First, let's give some props to Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, and Neal Peart for pretty much being the lineup for all of Rush, save for the first album with John Rutsey on drums, but yeah. Rush, unlike other prog bands, does not have a million bazillion members coming and going to keep track of. Now, let's just acknowledge, after 1980's proggy Permanent Waves album, they cranked it into a more radio-friendly mode with 81's Moving Pictures. It's arguably the Rush album. It's got Tom Sawyer. It's got Limelight. It's got YYZ. It's got Red Barchetta. It was already incorporating things of new wave and pop natures and getting comparisons to the Police and doing things like using reggae grooves on this song Vital Signs. It's amazing. The album title is a triple entendre and the jacket art reflects it. Movers, moving paintings. People being moved to tears by what they see in the paintings. All filmed by motion picture equipment. Moving pictures, moving pictures, moving pictures. Get it? It's great, and it's not where I want to focus. It's ultimately still just crossover 70s rock. After that, we get the albums Signals, Grace Under Pressure, and Power Windows. They carry the torch into the 80s and keep with Rush's clever blending of pop and prog and being their own band. It's all cool too, they're great. These albums all boast a new wave genre tag on Wikipedia. We just can't be here all day, and they're all heading to a new wave adjacent apex with 1987's Hold Your Fire. Geddy had gotten a Macintosh computer and a primitive version of this new recording software called Digital Performer. Alex Lifeson was really turning up the 80s chimey chorus sounds on his guitars. Neal Peart's drums are clean and spry and tight. He's still drum god Neal Peart, but he's laser focusing his talent into fitting pop groups like Terry Bozzio did in Missing Persons. There's even some gated reverb happening. While there's always synths on Rush stuff, the synths on this album sound more modern and in vogue than analog vintage. The band also has adapted the 80s hair and new wavy suit jackets. And they've got Amy Mann from Till Tuesday guesting on this single, Time Stands Still. It rocks. There's no big hit like Owner of a Lonely Heart or Invisible Touch from this mode of Rush, but the vibe they whip up when they really pull on these elements is a good one, and Hold Your Fire is well worth the listen. They didn't stay here long. They moved on toward the 90s with 89's Presto album and found themselves veering back to organic sounds, less synths, more guitars, and continuing to both be themselves and explore vast and different sonic areas untold for many albums to come. How proud of them.
Let my defenses down, all those wounds that I can't get unwound.
Okay, let's just talk about one more and get out of here. Pink Floyd are one of those bands that I don't really think of as a prog band the way I think of Crimson, Rush, Yes, and Genesis. But they are, and people will get mad if you try and deny them the title. Why don't I think of them as a prog band? Maybe it's because they started with 60s psychedelic and even their prog albums are more psychedelic prog. Maybe it's just that there's even a weird distinction in my mind between a progressive rock band and a prog band. Like, they're psychedelic progressive rock. They're not a prog band, man. Whatever. The other thing is, Pink Floyd just kind of went bust in the 80s. After the Roger Waters-led 79 album The Wall, they squeezed out 1983's The Final Cut, which sounds stuck in the 70s and was comprised of Wall leftovers, new Roger Waters Wall-ish songs, and no David Gilmour songs, so some consider it an unofficial Waters solo album, after which he wanted to and attempted to dissolve the band. Then, in '86, David Gilmour started working on a new album, which he said at the time could become his third solo album, but instead it ended up becoming the new Pink Floyd album without Waters. So, the second Pink Floyd album of the decade is kind of a Gilmour solo album. It's all a little too soured and dysfunction to think of any 80s Floyd as trooping Floyd in my opinion, though this 87 single, Learning to Fly here, is a noteworthy dreamy 80s jam.
Can't keep my eyes from the circling sky. Tongue-tied, twisted, just an earthbound distant.
And while the album A Momentary Lapse of Reason isn't a bomb, it's not really Floyd, and it's not really pulling from the new wavy times. Definitely the most dinosaur-y output in this video look. So even though I'm kinda just talking about Pink Floyd as a footnote to say, they're not really worth mentioning, I guess I've mentioned them anyway. The varied visions and driving forces in different directions just got to be too much, and the center fell out. How Prog of them. And now, I've rambled on longer than expected and indulged past the point of normal attention spans to lead us here, to the end of this video, where only us weirdos remain. How Prog of me. How Prog of you. How Prog of us.
Can't keep my eyes from the circling